The group that I'm a member of actually actively fought the Syrian regime for 15 years in its occupation of Lebanon. Then made peace with Syria as a whole once Syria left Lebanon. In my perspective, see, I've never done a debate before since school, so I wrote this whole thing, but I'm not going to tell you about this. I want to tell you about the real life situation on the ground. I want to tell you about some true stories. Because living in our comfort in the West, we get to look at everything from a textbook sort of scenario about political experimentation and geopolitical strategy and whatever else. The reality on the ground is much harsher than that. It's a lot harsher than that. And unfortunately, a couple of the speakers today brought back to mind an interview I saw, and I'll never forget, with the former US Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, who described the Israeli attack on Lebanon that was backed by the West. And it was actually, the governments refused to call for a ceasefire, thinking that we'll give Israel time to get rid of Hezbollah. As they were doing that, 1,300 Lebanese died. 900 of them were children. Businesses were destroyed. The country, and the country is no different to here. Very progressive, very modern, very open society. And as that country was being bombed and its people were being killed, commentators today reminded me of the statement of Condoleezza Rice where she compared it to the birth of a child. Did anyone remember that? She talked about the birth pangs of a new Middle East. You watch Channel 9, you listen to these commentators, they've no idea what's going on over there. They've got no idea what's going on in Syria. And it's such a shame that in our society, how easily media can be co-opted into geopolitical strategy. So there's a big conflict going on between the US and Iran. And they see Syria's government as a big supporter of Iran. We've got to get rid of it. So in doing so, we support with the most tyrannical regimes on earth, Saudi Arabia, no embarrassment to say that, the arming of some of the most awful fundamentalists that you can imagine, who will help truck in and bring into Syria and smuggle them over the border from Turkey and Lebanon and Jordan and Iraq, whilst we play our geopolitical game. This geopolitical game, I'll give you an example of it. 3 weeks ago I went to visit a friend and pay commiserations. His brother had been murdered in Homs. His brother was from a district in Homs known as Hamadigi. And there is not a single opposition member that can deny this. 138,000 Christians have been ethnically cleansed from Homs, by the same people that some here are suggesting today we should militarily intervene to support. The media is a powerful, powerful tool. It convinced us that the Mujahideen in Afghanistan back in the 80s were some good group of nice people trying to get rid of this awful regime that's got to go. It's backed up by the Soviet Union. And I watched a YouTube video that some of you have probably seen of Hillary Clinton in a university telling the students that the problem with the conflict in Afghanistan is that the United States is fighting the very people that we armed and we supported back in the 80s when we brought them in to get rid of this regime that had to go in our geopolitical struggle with the Soviet Union. And we armed it. And we used our media machine to turn it into this amazing, remember they used to picture them on horses, Lawrence of Arabia-esque. These same people are now carrying out systematic murder across Syria. They've ethnically cleansed, as I said, the entire Christian population of Homs, who are now refugees. And how many relatives I have with their relatives on the phone begging them for visas to come to Australia. Let's be honest about Syria. I think every single person here today can agree on something, and that is that there needs to be change in Syria. So there are two issues here that we need to talk about. One is genuine need for a reform in Syria. Two is confusing it with a geopolitical struggle with the main players being the United States and Iran.
I just wanted to say, look, we seem to have, not do we seem, we obviously have two very different views about what's happening in Syria, you know, about who's responsible for massacring whom, etc. Okay, now, I have an opinion about who's right on that, but it's basically uninformed, so it's not my place to say that. My question is, to Robert, and I suppose also to Susan, assume you're right about that. Assume that the opposition is actually more culpable in violence than the regime. What should we do about it? Do you still think the regime can survive? Wouldn't, even if the opposition is in the wrong, wouldn't it still be better to have democracy so that those things can be sorted out by the people themselves?
I think it's important for Syria to survive, not for the regime.
Arthur? Okay, I asked before about the Iranian geopolitical explanation, and I got a really honest answer. He said nothing about Iran. He did not try to pretend that this was a US plot to destabilise Syria because of Iran, which was just to me pure fantasy. No. Instead, he said openly and clearly, yes, this is part of the Arab Spring, but it should be called an Arab Winter because it's a disaster and it will result in the Salafi rule and so on. And to me, that's an honest, that is the real situation. But the fact is, these are backward countries where the majority of the population do support the bizarre religion. In Australia, we're pretty fortunate. Although half the population does claim to be Christian, they don't actually go to church, right? Most Australians don't actually believe this shit, right? But in the Middle East, most people do believe some kind of superstitious gibberish. And they're going to govern, right? Now, it's been admitted, and I want to give Robert the chance to withdraw it and to actually try to pretend that he agrees with what the Assad regime is claiming, namely that it is a Western Saudi plot to destabilise Syria on behalf of their struggle with Iran, instead of what you just admitted, that it's part of the Arab Spring, which all the autocracies really are opposed to. Or is it
Please don't label these countries as backward countries. They're real people, real lives. There are more gay bars in Beirut than there are in Melbourne. What are your measures for countries being forward or backward? I don't know. Number two, the Arab Spring, to me, I can only base it on the results. And the results that I see on the ground are intervention from outside to make sure that the results that occur afterwards aren't natural in any form. They're not what the people went out into Tahrir Square to get. Okay. And in Tunisia, certainly not what the people had in mind when the bravest Arab of all time set himself on fire on the first day of all of this. So it's not an Arab Spring. Yes, it has been hijacked. And when I talk about the struggle between Iran and the United States, Iran is a rejectionist state. It's not accepting the presence of Israel. Over 80 million, its economy is growing, it's developing technologically, it's developing weapons that can counter maybe in the future the weapons of the States. It has a 35-year relationship with the government of Syria, and any attempts, political attempts over the last 20 years by Arab states or the US or anyone else, using any means to try to pry that relationship open, like to break that relationship, have failed. And they see that as an extension of the Iranian reach into Lebanon and the presence of Hezbollah and Hamas in Israel. So yes, the removal of the Syrian regime isolates Iran, and then it isolates Hezbollah in Lebanon, and it's already removed Hamas from that grouping. So very much the strategy. And you don't go by what I'm saying. I'm not a scientist, political scientist commenting on TV. Just read WikiLeaks. Read the briefs that the Americans had with the Arabs in the various embassies of the United States over the last few years, and you'll understand that yes, the big geopolitical and geostrategic aim of the United States is the removal of Iran's reach by cutting off, and this is their terminology, its tentacles.
From what I've heard tonight, might be other issues which I'm just not aware of. I feel that the regime is in the fault. They're at fault because they just refuse to back down when it seems like the people are not happy with them.
I think it's mainly political. I think a lot of the trouble in Syria is instigated by external elements, obviously wanting to destabilize Syria for whatever reason. but I think it's. I don't think it's a homegrown conflict. It's. I mean, Syrians have lived happily for a long, long time without any problems. If you look at Lebanon as well, their neighbor, they've had problems with sectarian violence as well, but it hasn't never come to Syria before. So it's a very different situation there, I think.
Andrew, I wonder if you mind telling us what you know about Syria and think about what's happening in Syria.
Well, to be honest, I really don't know much. I don't watch TV. I've been homeless for the last 15 years, so TV is not a high priority in my life. But I have heard there's shit going down there, and I would like to know more about it because I like to be informed about these things. But at the moment, because I don't have a TV and I don't have a place, it's kind of hard to stay on top of what's going on in the world, you know. I don't have a TV at all. Yeah, I know the TV's bullshit. That's half the reason I don't watch it. That's half the reason I don't want one.
Andrew, when you say you know there's shit happening in Syria, what sort of shit?
Well, I know there's bad shit happening to the people that live there. I don't know exactly why and what it is for. I know the government's involved somehow, but that's about it. I really don't know much. I've my sister's living in Dubai at the moment, so she told me a little bit about it because it's sort of that area, but because she actually went through there and she told me about it and how sort of scary it was and so. But other than that, I really don't know much. I wish I could say more, but I don't know much.
The story in the newspaper, as most people read it, is that the government is cracking down in a very brutal fashion against peaceful protesters. So it's a very simple narrative.
That's bullshit. Why? Man, people have the right to free speech, don't we? Isn't a protest free speech?
But what if I were to say to you that a lot of those people in the streets with the protesters, some of the protesters of course are genuine and peaceful and they've got a reason to ask for reform. But what if the bad element have guns and are killing policemen, assassinating?
Hey, look, there's not much you can do about that unless you get guns yourself and shoot back. But then that only makes the problem worse, okay? So, I don't know how it can be done, but it has to be done peacefully, hopefully through talking. And I think everything can be solved through talking, no matter what it is, you know? I lived on the streets, I've been pissed on, I've been bashed up, I've been fucking everything in the streets, and it wasn't fun. But I'm still here, and I'm still fucking kicking. And look, I don't know much about the world because I've been so isolated from it. I would like to know more, and I would like to get more involved because a couple of my friends are very passionate about this sort of stuff, and I actually live in a commission flat at the moment. I just got housing about 6 months ago, and I see all the refugees coming into the commission housing, and man, they are there for legit reasons. They're not there to fucking sell drugs or be violent or be dickheads. They're there to try and make a new life, man, and that is cool. Yeah.
The main reason we're here is because we're calling on Mr. Rudd to allow the Syrian ambassador to come to Australia so we can have those talks.
Bring it, I reckon. Let him in, mate. Like, why wouldn't they? If he's an ambassador for a country, we need to talk. That's part of fucking diplomatic bullshit, isn't it? Like, we do need to talk and we need to fucking sort this shit out. It's just going to be hell otherwise, you know, because it's going to be every man for himself, and then we're going to fucking... People who've stashed guns and shit and bunkers in their fucking property, they're going to be the ones on top, and... It's going to be hell, mate.